little bit today. I'm a bit sleepy, so it might take me a bit to get going. Did not have my caffeine. All right. So what we're going to be talking about today in just a minute is a bit about FK and IK and how it relates to arcs and poses. But first, we're just going to do a really quick, really fast critique. This critique, I'm just going to look through it. I'm going to be like, yeah, everything looks good. This is how you can improve just a little bit. So if there is anything super major, I'll tell you about it now. And if it's something that is a little bit more minor, I'll tell you about it in the full critique I give you guys on D2L. And real quick, I'm going to stop my share and reshare real quick. There we go. So I think your middle one here looks really, really good. It has that nice kind of bounce and wobble. I do think it ends just a hair too quick. I think same with all three of them, actually. I feel like they end all just a little too quick. They all settle a bit. There needs to be a bit more wobble to what you have here. But other than that, I think overall it looks pretty good. So I don't know where my chat went. There it is. So I'm just going to go down like in order. I think your middle one looks good. I think that one looks fine. Doesn't settle too quick, doesn't settle too terribly fast. Your first one feels kind of odd, like it's predicting the shift. That might just be shifting some keyframes around. Yeah. You could also use a little bit more overlapping, a little bit more offsetting. That wobble end kind of feels a bit weird for the weight. As for the last one, I think it looks okay, but it settles kind of weird for the weight that you've given it. It feels like it'd be a lot lighter based on how it pushes across. It would have a little bit more of a sway than just a really gentle fallback. But overall, it looks good. It just needs some more work, I think. I think your middle one here looks pretty good. Needs a little bit of work, I think. I think it's mostly just that first part. The settle looks good. It just kind of raises up a little bit too soon, I think. Your third one here, I think, looks good as well. But that wobble seems a bit off. I think that's just your timing and your speed. Just like play with those keyframes a bit. And I think your motion here on the top one is good. Might push it a little bit more on some of those back swings. And then your wobble just needs a little bit of work. It kind of speeds up a little toward the end. But overall, I think it looks good. Just a little bit more work. So I think your top one here looks good. There's a couple of keyframes where it looks like the swing is going before the momentum changes. That could just be like push it one way or another. Keyframe wise, just a little bit, just need some retiming. But overall, I think the top one looks really good. Same with the second one. That wobble seems pretty natural for the weight that you've given it. This one just seems a little fast. I think that's just timing. But overall, I think it looks really good. I think this top one looks nice. It also kind of does that thing where it's anticipating the push back and forth. But I think it works a little bit because of the weight that's here. Same with this middle one. I think it works pretty well. It's got a nice settle there. Same with your third. I think it looks good. There's a couple little tiny things, little nitpicky things I'll pick out for you in my other online critique. But I think overall, I think this one looks good. So I think your top one here looks really nice. That wobble kind of speeds up just a hair right there. But I think it looks really natural other than that. It's like maybe one keyframe off, if that. I think it looks really good. Same with this middle one. I think it looks really nice. It's got a nice settle and wobble. Yeah, and same with this one. It does feel a little off on that first push. Like it's reacting maybe like a fraction of a hair too late or a little too early on certain things, but nothing too major. Like I said, same with this one. It's maybe like one keyframe off, but barely noticeable. Your top one here feels a little like fast. It's thinking about the motion before the pendulum top actually moves. I would shift your keyframes down a little bit, and then that wobble at the end seems a little fast. Just kind of spread those out with that retiming tool, and it should look a lot more natural. The second one looks pretty good. I think your wobble happens a bit too quick. There needs to be a couple more, since it's more spring-like, a couple more quick tiny ones like you have at the beginning. And I think that third one's okay. It's just got a weird kind of jitter to it. That could be the offsetting of your keys overlapping in a weird way. But overall, I think it looks all right. Gracie, I think your top one is looking good. I think it needs a little bit more work. Some of the timing's a bit off. It's kind of like preemptively moving before or at the exact same time as your top part. And then that settles just a bit quick. I think your middle one works though. I think it has that nice wobble that it would have if it hit that based on its weight. And then this one just also kind of preemptively goes before in the opposite direction before the momentum stops. So it's already kind of going in this direction before it stops. So that's a keyframe shift. But I think the wobble on it looks good. It's happening a bit too soon. So on your first one here, I like the weight that you've got it. That N just feels a bit weird. Something's kind of moving a little wonky in your keyframe offsets. It's also kind of moving in the direction before the pendulum switches momentum. That could be fixed in keyframes, but I would definitely relook at that wobble. It kind of like bounces a bit, like it's hitting something. Same with here on this middle one. That wobble just feels a bit weird. Same on your third one, I think, as well. I would just retake a look at that wobble. It could just be that your keyframes are too close on both of these, or you have some weird keyframes happening in the middle. I'd take a look at those. Yeah. Okay. But overall, everyone did very well. I'm actually quite proud of y'all. So let us take a look at what we're going to be doing. But first, for those of you remoting in, under class files on D2L, there is this bob and arm compressed zip file. For those of you online, go ahead and give that a good old download. We're going to be taking a look at that in a few moments. For those of you here physically in class, you can find that exact same thing under project files as bob and arm. So you can either download that via class files, you want that bob and arm, or if you're here in class, you want that bob and arm right there. Yeah, if you're going to download it from the class files, just download that zip file, go ahead and extract it, all that fun stuff. But since you're here in class, you can just download it straight from the server. All right, so let's take a look at Maya here. I don't have a Maya file for you guys, so you guys can just feel free to relax, chill, and watch what's going to happen on the screen. So I have 3 boxes here, and like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about how FK and IK kind of work. Can you guys tell me what FK and IK means? Do y'all remember? If you don't, that's okay. Yeah, so IK is inverse kinematics, and FK is forward kinematics. So pretty much all that means is it's just a different hierarchy of motion if you're going forward or in inverse. So think of how the parent-child relationship inside of Maya works. So I have my outliner here. I have cube 1, cube 2, and cube 3. If I put cube 2 with middle mouse click inside of cube 1 and move them, it's parented. I can still move cube 2, but anytime I move cube 1, it will move with it. That is how parent-child kind of works. Think of it like file folders. You've got your song, and you've got your album, then you've got your musician, and then you've got your overall music folder on your desktop. Think of it in kind of that way. You also have inside like an app, and you've got your stuff on your phone, that sort of thing. So you got to kind of keep in mind how things are moving when you parent stuff here inside of Maya. When you add objects to parents, it changes the overall world space of that object. So like I showed you, I put cube and 2 inside of cube 1. If I put that in there, and then I open this up and put cube 3 inside of cube 2, cube 3 will always still work by itself, right? Its world space is still everywhere. But once I click on cube 2, the world space of cube 3 becomes smaller. It becomes in relation to that cube 2. And then that compounds when I click on cube 1 because all 3 are inside them. It's kind of like nesting dolls. If you move one, you move the next one inside the next one, 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 inside the next one. It's a chain of command. You can really tell with rotation you're inside of Maya. So if I rotate this one a little bit, none of the others rotate. If I have cube 2 here and I rotate that one, it really moves the other one in relation, kind of like it's on the end of a stick. And then same if I do cube 1 here, they're moving in tandem with that one with no regard for their own world space. They're in that cube 1's world space now. So when we move things like bones and joints inside of here, it works very similar. So I have some bones that I've made here on these cylinders. I've rigged it up. Since you guys are going to be animators, you guys aren't really going to be doing any of the rigging for a while. Pretty much everything I'm going to give you in this class is pre-rigged. You don't have to do anything weird. There's like 1 or 2 issues with the one that you'll be using for your final where you may or may not have to paint skin weights. Every time I fix it, it breaks again. So I'm going to try that again this semester. Maybe Maya 2020 will work. But you're never going to have to build the joint system. You just have to know how it works. So we have 2 different types of systems here. So this first one, right here, is IK. It moves from the bottom. This is things that you would use for legs, that sort of thing. So it's working inversely to how we normally would move. This one here is IK. If I rotate my first joint, only it moves, just like with the boxes. If I move my second joint, that one and the first one moves, just like my boxes. And the third one here also moves, moving the second one, which moves the first one, just like the boxes. This one is FK, or forward. It's moving in a more forward motion, top down. You can think of this like fingers, you can think of this like arms, that sort of thing. So, checking my notes because I have no caffeine. Yes, okay, we are on the right track, making sure I didn't skip something good. All right, so pretty much how these 2 work is FK, forward kinematics, works only via rotation. So whenever you're moving them, you have to make sure that it's moving in the correct way. So what I'm going to do real quick is just on this frame 1 here. Yep. I'm just going to rotate and set keyframes on all of my joints here. And I'm going to take it from straight down to curled up at the top. So I'm going to curl my first one here, curl my second one here, and curl my third one so it's up here at the top, like so. So that, oops, I lied. Let's go to frame 20. There we go. So when I hit play here, we get a rave. It curls up. Right? That's what we expect. They're rotating into a position. Now, if I do the exact same thing here, but with my IK system, so I'm going to take it to frame 20, and just in the exact same way, I'm going to roll this up. So it's pretty much mirrored to the other one. They will move very differently. Which one's right? Depends, right? Depends on what you're doing. So there's very different methods that you can use here with these systems. For instance, IK, I said you can move them as arms. Everything always will move from that topmost piece. Your pinky is still part of your arm. Your pinky, the tip, will always move after this part, right? You're always moving from here. If I move this joint here, regardless of what I want my pinky's tips to do, it'll still always move. You got to think about the world space of objects. With legs, more IK, you lift your feet to walk. You don't lower your hips, I'd hope, or your knees to take a step. You can also move your hips while your feet stay still. So if I move this one here, that bottom part is going to stay there. But if I do that with the FK, all of them move. You can also use IK to do things like hold on to a monitor if it doesn't move. I am now moving in IK, even though my arm would normally be FK, right? I hope you guys remoting are on the right camera to see me act today. Yes, I think you are. Yes, good. Okay. Because whenever you're using IK, sometimes you might be given a character and they'll be like, hey, hold on to this TV remote and make sure that TV remote is still on your table. So your character will be holding that just like that, and you'll have to move them around it. Now, give or take, that thing might move, but you're still changed to IK. It's animating counter to what you normally would think of with that. It's any process that might make life easier by switching to FK. So when we work on the project that I'm going to give you guys at the end of class today, you do have the option with some of your characters to be both FK or IK or both simultaneously in the same scene. Now, the differences between these two, as we see here in the video, is to get them to move in the exact same way, I would have to change a whole bunch of keyframes, right? If I wanted my FK here to be more open, like my IK, I would have to keyframe that. I'd have to set a keyframe between each point to really try to get it to work in the exact same way. And even then, it still doesn't feel right. I'd have to go in with my curves and play around. But it moves pretty similar. So when you're working on projects and they're like, hey, I want you to use FK or I want you to use IK, just keep in mind the extra steps you would have to go in order to make it look the way you need. Now in the inverse, let's say I wanted my IK there to look more like my FK. They're both going to take a lot more keyframes to get them to look like the other. So just be kind of conscious of what type of movement you're looking for. Now, when we think about how these work, something we also need to keep in mind are arcs. Arcs is another 12 principle that we normally look at whenever we're doing anything with animation. I've said it before, it's not always true, but 9 times out of 10, everything in nature wants to move like a circle. It has some sort of roundness to its motion. So if I come over here and take a look at my animation graph editor, on this guy here, you'll see that the only thing that moves is not my rotation, but my translation, which is the opposite of how IK works. So FK works based off of translation. It'll always move from point A to point B on translate. It doesn't rotate at all. You would have to tell it to rotate, and even then, you're not really going to get the result you want. However, IK, this one over here, always works based off rotation. You're never really going to get much translation from it. Now I could move this bone over here. That doesn't look right. So it always works based off of rotation. So when you're using something that needs to use more rotation than translation, you want to use FK. If you want to do something that's more translation, you want to use IK. Another good way to remember that is IK is a straight line, FK is a circle. So like here, you can see, let me do this here, visualize, motion trail, visualize, motion trail. You can see it a lot more with this motion trail. And just remember, Maya is a visual calculator. It's only doing what you tell it. So it's literally just calculating how these move from point A to point B based off of the keyframes I've told it. So for FK over here, FK always moves in a straight line. So it's just going from point A to point B, quickest route it can. So if it's moving from this keyframe 1, it's going to try to keep that frame, that one joint, that one control in a completely straight line from there to there. Whereas 20, oh, not 20, I just looked at the number here. Whereas FK here does the same thing. It's using the best calculation it can to go to take this control, this joint here, from 1 to 20. Middle, so I'm gonna go from 10. On here, let's move this just a bit down. You can change that curve a bit. Now, if I try the same thing with our FK here, so let's say halfway, I want it to move more like this IK or FK a little bit. I'm going to move this out here, set a keyframe. It's still trying to move in a straight line. The only reason it's got a little bit of an arc there is because Maya tells So just keep that in mind. The more keyframes you have, the more you might have to change your arcs inside of your graph editor. So if I come over here and I change these arcs here, turn on. I break these tangents, come here, and change some stuff. My arc's still going to be the same, but it'll move a bit different. It has a slightly different motion. The arc of my graph editor has changed. So if I do that on this one as well, just make that a little bit more poppy for funsies. You can really get a different motion by changing your arc. So again, a little further. Yeah. So if we're still trying to get this IK here to still have more of an arc to it, we still have to come in and add more keyframes to make it look more like an arc. So it's not perfect, but you can see it, IK is still going point to point to point to point to point in as straight of a line as it can, even though it has the appearance of that arc. So I'm going to keep reiterating it. I feel like I'm saying it a lot, but just be conscious of what type of motion you're needing, what type of motion that you're getting. Are you adding too many keyframes trying to force your IK to be FK? That sort of thing. Are you trying to force your FK to be IK? Are you trying to make that more straight? Maybe you need to switch up. Just be conscious. Now you can switch between the two, like I've said. Normally, if you're rigging, or if you have something that's been given to you by a rigger, they'll normally have a switch. So when we take a look at bob and arm in a minute, there is a physical switch over in the channel box that will allow you to toggle between IK and FK. It does do some weird stuff. You do have to kind of clean up some keyframes when you do that, but it'll make your life easier depending on what you're trying to do. Now, with this one right here, I have a bunch of little red tick marks down here. When you are animating, you really want to be conscious of what a lot of people start calling tick mark overload. You don't want to add so many keyframes so quickly because you can get a whole bunch of little tick marks down here. So if I add another keyframe, maybe like on 6, maybe another one on 9. Yeah, I'm getting that motion a little better, but you're gonna start getting some weirdness if you watch that edge there. I've got too many keyframes. There is a thing as too much in almost everything. So just be conscious of how many keyframes you're actually putting down. Comment? Less is more. This kind of goes into that be conscious of what you're trying to animate. So you can see it on 20 right here on this IK. I have 2 keyframes. On this one, I have 2 keyframes, but they're very different motions. as you saw, it took me about 20 keyframes, every keyframe, every frame, to get my IK to look like my FK. If you can get that motion in only 2 keyframes, that's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier to spline too. When it comes down to it, when you start actually getting into the splining process further down the semester, adding more polish and more refinement to your graph editor, 2 keyframes is a lot easier to change than 20, right? So just kind of keep in mind with that. If you're adding more keyframes, you're just fighting Maya harder. And unlike Maya, we can eventually give up. It doesn't care. It's a machine. It's just calculating what it wants, that thinks you want. That being said, that eventually will go away. The more you use the keyframes, the more you do character animation. That adding so many keyframes does slowly fade. I remember the first animation I ever made was an abomination, and no one will ever see it, ever. But eventually, I stopped adding so many. I probably had every frame when I was trying to do something like 30 tick marks. Didn't know about the whole snapping to grid thing, all that fun stuff that you guys now know. So just be conscious. Be aware if you're adding too many tick marks. If you notice you've got like 10 in one little area, maybe you're using the wrong type of motion. Does anyone have any questions about IK or FK at this moment? FK is more arms, fingers. If you're moving, like if you take your wrist and you're like, I want to bend my fingers, but I don't want to bend my wrist, that's FK. But if you're like, I don't want to move my fingers, but I'm moving my wrist, regardless of what you do, since it's FK, your fingers will always move. Yeah, FK is more, you're moving from top down. Top down.
Wake up with Hardy.
An ad, yay. I don't have my ad blocker enabled. Let's see, do I have sound? No. Why don't I have sound? Sound is on. Points. He talks about that every time you're animating something straight ahead, it's a bit harder to go back and change something. That's true. If you were to try to animate this motion here straight ahead, you'd probably run into some complications eventually. And then if you would have to go back and change each keyframe to get rid of that weird jitter that you'd had. So for that reason, 90% of the time when we're working in this class, we do use post-pose. This way you can go back on your keyframe and change that pose. So, let's go ahead and open up that Maya scene that is inside of your bob and arm folder. So this guy here. Did it shut down? Oh. Oh, that's okay. At least it was only that and not another weird. Hmm? I'm getting there. I will tell you. You are good. So in there, there are a couple of different ones. I just recommend using the newest one, the 2021. You can use the older bobbin arm rig. It works decent, but it might have some mental ray nodes still in it. That 2021 also might have some mental ray nodes still in it. Like I said, Maya tends to not want to let those go. So when we open this up, yes, it does contain mental ray nodes. No matter how much I try to delete them, there's always at least one. If you get this, that just means that it's still using the old color space. You can just tell it okay. And what you should get is Bob here. He is BenBot's little brother. He only has one leg. And then we have an arm. Now, if you do not set your project before you open this file, your textures will not load. If you don't do this every time and you skip it once, sometimes the textures will no longer be applied in general and you'll have to manually do it. I do take off points when you turn this project in a few days. If you don't have the original textures, I do take off some points for that. So just be aware that if those textures do disappear, you do need to reconnect them. And it shouldn't be too hard. All you'll have to do is go into this HyperShade right here and click on the AI standards connected to him and just make sure everything is connected. It should automatically apply his texture, but it is in that folder for you in case it does disconnect. So just be aware when you go to render, I would render a test frame, make sure everything's showing up. I'd hate for you guys to get points docked just for something simple like setting your project. So if we were to animate this arm here with pose to pose method, which type of movement do you think we would use first, IK or FK? If we just wanted to move it around, make it wave. Good, Steve. To make it wave? We're going to make it wave, FK would probably be best. So remember, FK works off a rotation. If we were to make it hold on to Bob's head there and give him a good shake, would it be IK or FK? IK, because you're no longer letting go or moving from rotation. You'd be moving from translation. So I'm going to give you guys some information about these little dudes here. I do recommend creating a button to keyframe everything. We'll walk through that together to make your lives easier, and then I'll show you how to download that so it will be on your hard drives just in case it gets deleted, so you don't have to remake it. So let's take a look at this arm here. You have a whole bunch of different controls. You've got fingers, thumb, palm, wrist, elbow, shoulder, and then you also have this main body. This is that overall keyframe location. And if you notice, This little arrow here is also keyframeable. And if we look, there is an IK FK switch. So what that does is it goes between 0 and 1 to change it to be either FK or IK. So right now it is set to FK. If we were to set this to IK, we now get a whole bunch of different controls that we would have to change. It's working from the ground up because it's FK or IK. So if you do go to change something to be IK, just keep that in mind. It will shift your entire animation to a different location. But just changing the keyframes to match it back up should fix that problem. Now, if we were to pose this and animate it, we'd want to use pose to pose, right? If we were to try to animate this straight ahead, if we wanted to change something down the line, it'd be a lot harder, right? So we would want, what's going on here? To change things based off of pose to pose. So if I know on frame 1, I'm going to set a keyframe on this default, and I just want him to be like, stop. That's it, just stop. I would want to rotate from my shoulder, because when we have our hand face down, yeah, we can turn it from the wrist, but most of that comes from our elbow and our shoulder. So also be thinking about how your body would move normally. So I'd set that keyframe there, and then I would just lift my hand like so. Always keep in mind your poses. You want to make the big poses first. So that big pose that I started with was just that normal relaxed tension state. That next big pose was that stop, right? If I wanted to change to a fist, that would be my next biggest pose, right? So I would do that maybe on frame 25 or 30. Change that stop to a fist. It's a nice big pose. But if I want to go back and add some in-betweens, maybe this roll happens too quick or not fast enough. Maybe there's not enough exaggeration to that hand to really pull it back. I can add another keyframe there as an in-between to really exaggerate that motion. You don't want to add too many keyframes too quick. Get your big poses first, and then go back between each one and add any in-betweens or extremes that you might need. Now, that being said, you can use auto key. It's this little button down here with 2 arrows swirling around, a little dash next to a guy that's really scared for his life of this cog. That's down here in the very bottom next to the script editor. I personally am not a big fan of AutoKey. Me and AutoKey have a love-hate relationship. I think it works great, but it doesn't like me. I use it too much, and then I mess up my animation. That's just me personally. I know of a lot of people that really like AutoKey. I know Greg uses it quite often. He has no issues with it. This is personal preference. If you really like AutoKey and you're like, it will save me from messing up and setting keys and all this stuff, please use it. If you're like me and you're like, that thing is evil and made for mischief, you don't have to use it. Question? Yeah, that was a valid sentiment. So if you don't want to use AutoKey, you don't have to. Just be aware that it's there. You can use it. And it does work quite well for a lot of people. Just make sure you're keyframing everything. But remember, put big poses first, then your extremes, and then you can go back through and add any minute changes in your poses that you might need. And then you can go into your graph editor and play around. Now, on that note, if you don't have enough information So let's say I don't have this keyframe here. Maya will assume that she knows what you want, when you want it, and she'll decide what your in-betweens will be. This is why our poses are so important. We want to make sure we have nice big poses to make our life a little easier when we go back and in between. And all that in-betweening is just going back in here and changing our curve. So if I know I want this to be a more snappy, bouncy motion, I can change that curve and get a slightly different animation. If I want to change that curve to be the opposite, maybe I go in the other way. Maybe I roll back before I roll up. Get a little bit of sass in there. Make sure you're going in and changing your keyframes, playing in your graph editor, and making sure your motion's moving how you want it, not how Maya thinks you want it. Some good tidbits to know is when you are making your animations here, break down your motion like a phone number. So you have your first keyframe. You've got your second keyframe, and then you have to go back into the middle and change anything you might need to. So think about it like area code, your prefix, and then your actual number. So like if you think of your cell phone number, you've got your area code for where you're from. You've got your first digits, which is normally just your carrier's numbers. Doesn't really matter too much now because everyone has a phone, everything's weird. And then you've got your actual like number. So similar for keyframes. So you'll have your first keyframe, your big pose. You'll go back into the center and be like, how can I make this a little bit more extreme? How can I exaggerate this motion a bit more to make it more clear? So again, that was me pulling my hand in. Maybe I'll pull it in even farther. And the point here as well is you don't want to scrub on your timeline because I haven't changed too much in my graph, right? The motion is still going to be that default motion that Maya sets for you. The best way to get around that, and you still want to see your motions, is to use the greater or less than toggle buttons. The ones that are like little V's that are on their sides. You can use those to toggle between keyframes. So you can see your animation without having to hit play. So I have my big pose, my normal, my in-between extreme, and then my big pose. You can also decide to use the stepped view in your graph. So let's say I don't want to even consider using those little toggle buttons. I don't even want to look at how the graph is being made. I'll delete that keyframe. You can enable the step type of keyframing right here so that all you get I didn't do it on all of it. Hold on. So all you get is just the motion, just the keyframes that you've built so you can get a basic understanding of your timing, your poses, to see if the overall animation looks how you want it to look. This way, if I'm like, oh no, I really don't like this keyframe, maybe I need this to be even further back, or maybe I need it to be a little bit more to the side. I can change that now before getting into my graph editor. Now, if you're like, I don't really want to do that either, I still want to see all of my keyframes in the standard, way. I don't want to have to change anything. Maybe I've already done a little bit of stuff in the graph editor like I've done here, and I'm like, I know I kind of want that. I don't think it might be exactly what I want, but I still want that, I think. What you can do is you can right click on your timeline here, and there's this little thing called Enable Step Preview. All you have to do is toggle that on, and it pretends like you're looking in the stepped view without actually being in the stepped view. So you can see my curves didn't change, but my animation did. This is just a really, really good way to see how your animation is working without having to hit play and seeing all the splining that Maya's done for you. Does anyone have any questions about that just in general? Anyone remote having any questions? Yep, just still using FK. The main focus here is you really just want to focus on your posing. You don't want to get so caught up in trying to get the animation looking right that your poses suffer for it. Get your poses down first, double check them with those little bracket keys or those little greater less than keys. Check it with the Enable Step Preview. And then just go through and make sure that you have your extremes in there, those most push exaggerated keys. So for me, that would be here on this frame 10, curling that down. Like so. And then I could go in, turn off my enabled step preview just by right clicking, disable that, and then changing my graph editor to fit what I think my motion should be. Then from here, it's all just more subdividing. If I'm like, I really want another motion here between this one and here, maybe I want it to actually be more down. You can add those in-betweens after. So this is the process you kind of want to at least start thinking about. Get your big poses, get your extreme exaggerations, and then going back through and making sure everything's moving correct. Adding keyframes here and there as needed. You don't want to just dive in, throwing keyframes down and hoping everything works out for the best. Now, if you're like me sometimes and you're like, hey, I really like the graph editor. I've gotten used to it. I think it's neat, but I just want to see my keyframes in a different way. You can come up here to Windows, Animation Editor, and Dope Sheet. What the Dope Sheet is if you've ever seen, I know I showed a few in that first class when we were looking at like milk call and stuff like that. They've got little tick marks next to everything. This is just another way of keeping track of those tick marks, of those keyframes, without having to look at the graph editor, without having to think about the timeline. Just overall, you're like, how many keyframes do I have in this animation? For me, I like to keep this dope sheet down here with the graph editor and the timeline, because I can really see my keyframes a bit better. It'll also show you different things about them. You can edit, you can take a look at the curves, you can change them here a little bit. It's just a different way of viewing things that is available to you. I just want you guys to be aware it's there. Play around with it if you're interested, but it's not required. It's just something, it's another tool for your belt. Does anyone have any questions at all about poses, about the step preview, about FK, IK, anything? Okay, so I introduced you to ARM. He can be FK and IK, right? But we haven't taken a look at Bob. So Bob, as I've said before, is BenBot's younger brother. He's got one leg. He's got all these different controls on him. So we've looked at the arm. It has FK and IK. It's got some other neat stuff kind of hidden in here, that sort of thing. But Bob is a bit different. Bob is a bit more standard, a bit more what you're probably thinking he'll be. He can also, I'm pretty sure, switch between IK and FK. There's a couple of different things going on here with his controls. So I'm going to go into this wireframe mode here. So you can see all of his controls. He does have a few hidden ones. So we have his main overall arcing control, which is this tiny little purple circle. For this circle, I highly recommend using it to just move him into space to where you would like your animation to start, keyframe it, and then never move it. This control is mostly used for putting a character in a spot and then moving him from scene to scene, not from spot to spot. So when you move that little circle, you're moving the whole of BenBot or BobBot. Everything will move. So if you've already got him moving forward in a jump or a little like scoot, if you move that circle too, he'll move twice as forward. It's like you're keyframing on top of that keyframe. So I recommend just putting it in the spot, keyframing it, and just leaving it alone. What I mean by taking scene to scene is, let's say Bob's in a house on one keyframe, and now he needs to be outside in the next. This isn't for moving him from point A to point B. This is for like moving him from here to the hallway in one frame. So that little purple circle, leave it alone, put it in a spot, let it be. Next we have his next big control. So this is the nice big main section control. It moves him. He can squat from here. This is also where his control size is. So if you need his controls to be a bit bigger, you can take them up here. You can also change his head switch, also his FK and IK feet. They have separate controls. So if you keyframe them, just be aware that you might have to switch some stuff up when you keyframe, if you toggle that. Then we have, I'm going to lock his body. There we go. His inside of his head. This is FK. Lets you roll it around, lets you be able to turn him to make him look where you want him to look. He also has this little neck in here. It allows this ball joint. He has under here to kind of roll. What can sometimes happen is when you're making him jump or move, that little ball joint can come unattached, so it looks like his head's floating in a different location, or it's just off socket. If you roll that, it'll fix it. It'll just move it a little bit back to where it needs to be, to have it centered, to be more realistic. You don't want to make him jump and then show the underside and it be looking like that. Doesn't look very nice. Next we have this little arrow here. This is his knee pivot. This will allow you to turn his knee side to side. You can't move it up and down, but if you're trying to get him to wiggle, maybe he's preparing to jump and you need to add a little bit of knee shake, or maybe he's turning and you need that overlapping action of his knee moving first. It is there. Then we have his 2 foot controls. So this circle is his heel. It'll allow you to roll him up onto his heel. That way you can get him to land on it if need to. You can also have him, maybe he's trying to sneak, that sort of thing. And then we have his overall leg and foot. Comes from the heel. Remember, he is IK for his legs. So you can make him turn his foot in different directions. You can make it lift up off the ground. That sort of thing. Now, if you change him to be FK on his leg, you get some different controllers here. You have this other pin pivot here, allows him to swing. Same here. Ankle spin and toe. There are ways that I can see you guys having him switch between the two. So just be aware that both are available to you. And then, like I said, the arm is already FK and can be switched to IK. Now, when you keyframe, for instance, our little Bob bot here. That's not the one I want this one. I mentioned making a button so that it's easier for you guys to control him. What I mean by that, train, is every time you have to keyframe Bob, you have to select every single joint, or not every single joint, but every single control in him in order to accurately keyframe him pose-wise. If I wanted to have him move from here, so let's say I want this to be my main position, I would have to manually click on each one of his controls. And make sure there is a keyframe before I move him. The reason we do this is because if I didn't keyframe, let's say a few of those, and I want to move him forward, and I only move his head forward, he breaks. That also being said, if I'm like, I really want to pull this down on this frame, scoot him, maybe he's going backwards, and then move this one back, he's going. But if I'd come back and decide, hey, I want him to be looking down first, that's his only keyframe on his head. I did have to go back through and make sure that his head is back up next frame because I didn't keyframe his head on that original move back, right? It's just more work for yourself. Make sure you're just keyframing. Doop, doop, doop. Now to do that, we could manually click on all of them, right? That's tedious. We also have a section over here in our outliner. It's labeled Ultimate Handy's Handy All Controls. This is all the controls in the hand. But we don't have one really for Bob, right? We do have one here in this TSMG rig. If we open up all this, you can see that there's some controls here. It's kind of tedious. You'd have to open up all those little folders. It's a lot of effort, right? We can change all of that to be in one solitary button that you guys don't have to worry about with the script editor. It's not too scary once you start getting used to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a script all together at the same time for BobBot so that you guys don't have to worry about manually going through and clicking all of his controls. So the first thing we're going to do here is make a new shelf. So all of these up here are different shelves that are pre-made for you So the Arnold one is pre-made with Arnold tools. Motion graphics are things most commonly seen in motion graphics. Same with MASH, rigging, animation, modeling, curves, and sculpting. But you can make your own personalized one. So if there's a lot of tools that you use quite often, you can put them on your shelf here. So I'm just going to click this little cog right here, and I'm going to click New Shelf. You just want to name this something you'll remember, something that's easy for you to see. So for me, I'm going to just call it Laura Shelf, and then type in OK. For all this, because I had a space. Don't add spaces. Maya doesn't like it. But you'll see now I have this little shelf up here called Laura Shelf. So this is where if I'm like, I really use the extrude button all the time. I don't like using the shortcut keys, but I really don't like going all the way up here, making sure I'm in modeling, going up here to mesh tools and going down, making sure it's here. Oh, it's not. I got to go over here to edit mesh. You can actually just add that button to your shelf. So if you're like, I really hate working in the graph editor, you can have buttons up here that would normally change your graph up there. So all you have to do is have your keyframe selected. Different things that you can do up here. But you can also create custom ones. So if you're like, I know I'm going to be doing this motion 8 different times. Maybe you're making a hair on a character and you're using like poly extrude and all this fun stuff from a curve. You can just make a button that'll just do it for you. So right now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go to our script editor. So you can either go down here to this little button that's like a semicolon between some brackets, or you can go up here to Windows, General Editors. I'm pretty sure it's Script Editors right there. And what you get is this. So this is the script editor. It's quite powerful. You can write scripts. Stop that. But you can also remove stuff that you've already done. So right now, this is everything that I have done inside of this open project since we started class. It's a lot. This is everything from when you select an object, when you open a project, you save a project, when you render, this gets full of all your renders, that sort of thing. This is everything that your Maya does visually. This is what it's doing code-wise. So what we want to do is we want to null this out. We want to remove everything that we've done because it makes it a little harder to figure out exactly what we're needing to grab. So I'm just going to come up here to edit and clear history. You can do history, input, or all. I'm just going to do all. So now everything that I've done inside of this Maya file has just been erased since I've had it open. And since I've been working in it. So I have removed everything. So just edit, clear all. So now what we want to do, you do want to make sure that you have his layer, his mesh layer turned off or locked. You can also visually turn it off to make it a little easier if you like. And what we want to do is methodically click all of our controls. So I'm going to click my head control, my neck control, that knee, my foot, or my heel, then my foot, my main control, and then that overarching root control. Now you can do this out of order. Just be aware you want to make sure you have all of those. So you should have your head, your neck, your knee, your heel, your leg, your upper body, and your root control. Once you have all of those, all you have to do from here is click and drag to highlight all of your parts. Then go File and Save Script to Shell. Now this next part is very precise. If you accidentally click the wrong button, it won't work. So I'm going to save script to shell, and you'll get this little tiny box that says Maya 2020 question mark, and then the X, and it'll ask you to enter the name of your item. So I'm going to call this Bob_control IK, because it is the IK control. I don't have any of my FK controls selected. And you never want to hit enter. What happens when you hit enter is Maya will automatically think you want to create it in Python script. We don't want to create it in Python script, so I'm going to hit OK, and it'll open up which type of script would you like to write. We want a MEL script. Python won't do anything, however, MEL will. So I'm just going to click MEL, and you'll see it automatically makes my Bob control IK button here. Can't read the whole thing. That's okay. At least we know what it is. So if I deselect all of my controls and I click that button, they all reselect perfectly. So now if I wanted to keyframe all of my controls all at once, so once I get my second pose, I could just click that button, set a keyframe on everything, and then move to my next pose. It's a lot easier than trying to manually click each individual one and set a keyframe each time, because it will happen. You'll forget to accidentally keyframe something and something will mess up. Even with auto key on, you can have some mistakes. This will help mitigate at least a few of those. Then you will do the same thing for the arm. So you would highlight each individual joint, making sure that everything is selected. Make your script. And then that way you'll have something to keyframe. Does anyone have questions about the button? Did it work? Anyone remotely have a question? Okay. No questions. Good, good, good. So what the homework is going to be is you are going to be making an animation with Bob and this arm. So you can find this write-up up on D2L under the write-up section. So project 3 is how can you tell the difference and how can you animate the difference of IK and FK if you've never done it. So what we're going to be doing is this will help you learn those differences in real time. It'll help you analyze how the forces, the weight, overlapping action, and all of those are different between the two. It'll also help you with your pose-to-pose process and how you can use your cameras to tell a story. So what are we looking for? I want you to animate Bob and arm. There's only really 4 things I'm looking for. Bob has to jump twice. I need to be able to see the whole jump. The arm needs to swipe, move, swing, punch, or gesture in some way at least once. Your animation needs to be longer than 7 seconds, but no shorter than 7, but longer than 10 seconds. Strike that, reverse it. And you need to use 3 different cameras to tell a story about what's going on between the 2 of them. It needs to be fully rendered by class on the 24th. What that means is next class and Tuesday are work days. You're not mandatory to come in. I'll be here. If I'm not in here physically, I will be at home with my Zoom open, waiting for your questions. So if I'm not here, I'll still be around. You'll just have to make sure you log into Zoom. And then just make sure it's the H.264 codec like all times. You can give it a title. You can have fun with it. I do have a couple of examples for you. But before I show you those, does anyone have questions about what's going to be due? Okay. You can use sound. Some of these have sound. I can't show you the sound apparently. So just be aware that some do have sound. This one is eligible for 2D. So if you would like to do 2D, you may definitely do so. Just tell me beforehand so I know to expect it. I won't tell you no. Let's see. So you can have some fun with it. You can hurt BobBot or you can make him feel good. Just be aware of your keyframes, your poses, and that sort of thing. I will be looking at your cameras. If you're working on keyframing your camera and you go to Control-Z to back up your camera, let me actually reopen Maya real quick. If this has ever happened to you where you've accidentally moved your camera and you've tried to fix it, Control-Z does not work. It'll take you back, it'll fix your objects, but it won't fix your camera. Your brackets keys will. I'll show you. Slowly. So I just got a sphere here. So let's say this is the position I normally want to see all my animation at. I've got a render cam, I've got my perspective cam. This is supposed to be my render cam. It's not supposed to move. I accidentally unlocked it. and I zoomed in and like rotated. If I control Z, it won't take me back. Right now it'll say there's nothing I can undo, which is interesting. Make sure your undo is enabled. I'll double check and show you how to do that. But if I wanted to go back to that pose, I could hit my brackets key. These are the ones that are underneath near that backspace by the backslash we used to get to ETSUE3. This little brackets will take your camera back as an undo. You can also redo with the one that's like this direction, and you can undo with this one. It's a neat little button, so be aware that it exists. It'll help you out if you accidentally mess up your camera. Now it's saying on here that I somehow no longer have undo enabled. So I'm going to come down here to my settings and preferences just so you guys are aware this exists. There is an undo section here. It is on. Sometimes it does get turned off. So if you're using a computer you've never used before, double check to make sure it's on. There's a keyboard shortcut that I don't think even Maya knows because I've tried Googling it. It is extra credit if you figure out what the keyboard shortcut is to turn that undo off and back on. If you can figure it out and prove it to me, I'll give you a couple points on your lowest grade. So far, no one has succeeded. But it does sometimes happen. It does sometimes toggle off. So that is something. You can also, like I said, and I think in a different day, you can change your time slider here so that you can update different things all at the same time. You can also change how large your keyframe size is and that sort of thing. I recommend playing around with that. You can also change the frame rate on your animation if you need to, all in here. Now, I said that I would show you guys where you can find your shelf. So I have my LoRa shelf right here. If I want to take that home with me, right now default, it's not saved where you think it would be. So you would think that in my folder, just for instance, where did I put it? Under in-class files here, you would think it would be normally saved in like this script section. It doesn't save there. If you are looking for this to save it yourself, if you go to your documents folder, under Maya and projects, default, things don't get saved here. This is where all of your normal Maya scenes that you save go to. This is where I send a lot of you when you're looking for renders. So if you've rendered something and you just can't find it, try looking under this default images section. Sometimes it'll just send it there for whatever reason, regardless of if you've set your project. Normally this is where you can find those. But where that script is actually being held, this shelf here, is actually under this Maya 2020. You can look under scripts, still not there. Presets, there's nothing in there. It's underneath preferences. This is that thing that if your Maya ever messes up, I tell you to delete. And I'll also be like, hey, make sure you haven't saved anything in there. This is what I mean. We've saved a shelf. It's under the shelf right here. So you can see I have shelf underscore LoRa underscore shelf. If I want to keep that for forever, all I have to do is Control C and then take it and put it wherever I need to save it. So if you've made a shelf and you don't want to have to remake it after this class, you can go into this folder and copy it to your hard drive. I recommend saving it in your script folder, just because there's nothing really that's probably going to be going in there. And then when I want to load it onto my Maya, so if I come in one day and my LoRa shelf here is gone, you just come over here to this little cog and click Load Shelf and go to where it is on your hard drive. This will keep you from having to remake your buttons all the time, especially if you have a nice personalized shelf that you use at home, or if there's a lot of buttons that you've got on your shelf, you don't have to worry about someone accidentally deleting it. It's just a nice little handy thing. And I really recommend if you've made a script, you at least copy it somewhere else in case you have to delete your preferences. Any questions at all about anything I've covered, about the homework, anything like that? Any questions for those of you remoting in? I'm gonna assume no. So like I said, this is due the 24th, not this Thursday, but the next one. This Thursday and Tuesday are work days. Like I said, if I'm not physically in here, I will be on Zoom. So if something happens and I can't make it into class, I'll still be available to you guys. So that's all I have. Your homework is just project 3. You can see the write-up. You guys have the file. You guys don't have to stay here in class anymore. You can go home. You can go find breakfast. Those of you at home, you can go eat, take a nap for your next class. But if you do want to stay and work on stuff, there's about an hour left of class time. I'll be here for a while till everyone kind of piddles out and leaves. So if you do have a question, you can pop back into the Zoom. Or if you want to stick around for you guys physically here, you can do so. But I am going to go ahead and end my Zoom. I'm going to directly reopen it. That way I can start getting this processing because it does take a little while.